Good evening. Welcome to Book It Now. I'm your humble host, Q. Thank you all for joining us on this continued journey of empathy, growth, and understanding. I'm going to jump right into it today. We have two special guests. My first guest is the Honorable Sheila Tillerson Adams. She is a trailblazer here in my home county of Prince George's in Maryland. She is the first African American woman to serve as the district court judge, serving from 1993 to 1996. Next, serving as the first African American woman to be appointed to the circuit court, serving from 1996 to 2010. And now, the first African American woman to serve as the administrative judge for the Seventh Circuit here in Prince George's County. Honorable Sheila Tillerson Adams, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. And, I like to start with all of our guests with a little bit about their background. So if you could share with us a bit about where you come from and where you grew up.
Well, I come from here.
From here.
I'm from Washington, D.C., born and raised in Washington, D.C., Northeast, Michigan Park. Went to Bertie Backus Junior High School and just love the city. From Washington, I moved to Newport News, Virginia,
Okay.
where I went to high school and then left there as fast as I could and went to Morgan State University.
Back here.
Loved Morgan State University, and I love the Washington metropolitan area.
Mm-hmm.
But Morgan State University is where I found myself as a young woman.
Really?
Morgan State University transformed me from the little girl I went there to the young woman I became.
Mm-hmm.
I left Morgan in 1979 and matriculated to Howard University School of Law because that's where I wanted to get my foundation in the legal community.
Right.
So I went to Howard, and then from Howard, I started practicing law. And then decided that I needed to go back and get a little more education because I felt that there was something else I needed, and that was in the area of tax law.
Tax law, okay.
So I went to Georgetown University and received my LLM in tax in 1987.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, so I'm hearing Morgan State is where you had that first spark of interest in law to continue that at Howard?
I decided I wanted to be a lawyer at Bertie Backus Junior High School
Really?
in Washington, D.C. in the 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
We had an assembly. They brought all the students into the auditorium, and for the first time, there was this, I don't know her name, but this was tall, dark, African-American woman, and she was a lawyer. She was a juvenile lawyer.
Okay.
And in the midst of all that, I remember, just being a kid in the auditorium, not really wanting to be there for an assembly.
Mm-hmm.
But she touched me. I listened to her, and at that point, I didn't know anything about being a lawyer, or what a lawyer was, or what a lawyer did. So I listened to her, and I remember going home and telling my parents, I want to be a lawyer.
Right. And what was that conversation like? Were there a lot of black lawyers at the time, or?
Oh, no. Like I said, I didn't know a lawyer prior to that.
Right.
I really didn't even know what a lawyer did.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew from that assembly it was something I wanted to do because lawyers helped people.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to do. So I told my mom, and from that point, we researched what I needed to do to become a lawyer. And that was the path.
And what drove you back here to Morgan State with all the schools in the nation and the area of, I guess, Newport News? It's not as a college atmosphere as one might
You want the
imagine.
truth or?
The truth. I love the truth.
My mom went to Morgan,
Okay.
and at that time, my other passion was football. And I loved the Morgan Grambling Classic. And I didn't want to go to Louisiana at that time, so I went to Morgan State University.
Wow.
That's
And-
why I went there.
And what inspired you to move to Howard and continue that education?
Well, Howard, all of the dynamic lawyers that I was aware of went to Howard. Thurgood Marshall went
Sure,
to Howard.
sure.
Howard was the school that trained the lawyers that changed the civil rights movement. Howard was the school that trained the lawyers that helped my people.
Right.
So that's why I want to go to Howard University School of Law.
Great. And in moving through, all the education and looking at your next steps, what was your goal when you started at Howard? When you said, okay, I'm going to graduate, What were those next steps for you? Did you always see yourself as a judge? That's really what I'm
Oh, okay.
leaning towards here.
No. I never even thought about being a judge. I just wanted to be a good lawyer. I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference in this community. Being a judge wasn't even on my radar.
Really?
Matter of fact, I didn't even realize that being a judge was something that I could do. So I never thought about being a judge. I did not even, the seed of being a judge wasn't planted in me until I became a prosecutor. After I left law school, I became a Reginald Heber Smith Fellow, which was a lawyer that was placed in the community to do community service, to help the people, to help the poor.
Is that something you sign up for?
Yes,
Or
you sign up, you apply for.
Okay, apply
and
for.
then I was placed back in Baltimore.
Okay, wow.
Because I wanted, at that time, after I left Morgan, I loved Baltimore. I wanted to go back to Baltimore. I wanted to make a difference with the people in the community.
Absolutely.
So being a community lawyer meant that I would not just work in the community, I would also have to do community service.
Absolutely.
So I went back to Baltimore and I worked for the Legal Aid Bureau as a Reginald Heber Smith Fellow, and I worked in the community in Cherry Hill. And then after doing that for 2 years and doing family law there, I realized that in order to handle the more complicated cases, because there's tax consequences to everything you did in life, I needed to have a stronger tax background. So I applied to Georgetown to get my LLM, but I needed a day job. And that day job was at the state's attorney's office. So I applied and accepted a position at the state's attorney's office here in Prince George's County.
Okay.
Went to school at night. And I'm getting to your question.
Sure.
It wasn't until I went to the state's attorney's office and I started trying cases. And I'd try cases in front of judges, and I'd try cases in front of judges. And then after the trials, they would always say, Miss Tillerson, at the time I wasn't married, Miss Tillerson, will you approach the bench? And I'd go up thinking I would get I didn't know what they were going to say, but they would say, you should be a judge. And the first couple of times I thought to myself, really? Because there was nobody on the bench that looked like me.
Right.
So, and I didn't really think that much of it. I just went on about doing my job, trying cases, and loving what I was doing.
Right.
It wasn't until several years later that, I kept hearing it enough, and I thought about it. I said, well, I could be a judge. And that's when I started the application process.
That's wonderful. I do want to circle back to that.
Okay.
But you said something that struck me there. You said there are tax implications through all cases, or all these different cases, all these different things are affected by tax. Could you explain that?
Well, at the time, when I was working at the Legal Aid Bureau, I was doing primarily family law.
Right.
And so, and at Legal Aid Bureau, you don't think of clients that make a lot of money, but there was one client that happened to have been in a mental institution who had a significant amount of money. She was married and her husband was trying to divorce her. And there wasn't, normally, because of her husband's income, she would not be a client that would have otherwise been legal aid eligible. Because she was in a mental institution and because it was clear that people were trying to take advantage of her, the director assigned that case to me. And when I went and looked through her case and we started working on it and things like that, I realized that because of the property, the money, the pensions, there are tax implications to that. And if I was going to go out eventually into private practice and represent people that had significant wealth, I would need to make sure I was well versed in the tax implications of all of their transactions in order to adequately represent them.
Absolutely.
So that's why I decided to go back to get the LLM.
And what else did you learn in that experience in those 2 years working as a prosecutor in Baltimore?
I wasn't a prosecutor in Baltimore.
In
In Baltimore, I was at the Legal Aid Bureau.
Okay.
And, yes.
And the prosecutor's office was here.
The prosecutor's office in Prince George's County.
Okay. So what was that whole experience like? I know you said you were going to school, working at night, going to school. What was that experience like?
It was invigorating. I mean, it was exciting for me. First of all, I love school. And I really initially went there thinking I had a day job.
Right.
But I fell in love with prosecuting cases because there were so many, there's so many cases, and there were so many victims that really needed to make sure that they got justice
Right.
through these cases. And it was just a wonderful experience because the prosecutor's office is the most powerful position in our criminal justice system.
Absolutely.
Because they decide who's charged. They decide who doesn't get charged. They decide how the case is presented. Most people think it's the police or the judge. Oh, it's the prosecutor. A prosecutor can walk into the court and say, I'm going to null process this case. And the court may think this case, has merit. But it doesn't matter because once the prosecutor says null pros, case is over with.
Right.
The police can tell a prosecutor, you better charge this person. This is what they did on the street. But the prosecutor can look at the facts of the case and decide to say, there's no merit to this case. And they can decide not to go forward.
Wow.
So they are the most powerful, that's the most powerful position in the criminal justice system. So as a young woman coming to this county and having the opportunity to really feel like I was doing justice,
Right.
because I could see it, I never forget this case. It was a young man. I was given a trial. And as I went through the file and investigated, I was the kind of person that would go out and talk to all the witnesses, look at the scene, and go through the file. It wasn't adding up. And I said, but this is the wrong person.
Right.
And so I decided to bring the defense counsel in, and I knew the questions I needed to answer if this was the right person or not. And I said, you let me talk to your client, and if he, depending on the outcome of the conversation, we'll see how we're going forward with the case.
Sure.
But clearly, after I talked to him and had gone through all the witnesses and he verified everything that I knew was the case, I now prosed the case. Not only did I now prost the case, we confessed not guilty because it ultimately became clear that they had the wrong person.
Right. And what is that like when you have to prosecute a case, you have a victim, but the defense, you clearly see, they have the, they have the right person on their side, as if he's not guilty, is what I'm trying to say here. What is that?
But see, one thing I find, if you're honest with people, they understand victims want justice. They don't want just somebody arrested. They want the right person arrested.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I've always been very honest with all the victims that I represented, or because they're all citizens of this county, so I do represent them because you represent the citizens of the county. So I always made a point to sit down and talk to the victims in the case, to make sure that they understood what was going on in the case every step of the way, to make sure that they knew that I was going to do all that I could do to investigate the case and put on a case that, if warranted, would get a conviction.
And how has that played out in your experience as a judge?
What do you mean?
How it has maintaining that honesty, just knowing all sides of a case, having working on the prosecutor side, knowing what to expect from a defense, and then having to be responsible for a verdict. Well,
it's important, I think, for any jurors to have experience before going on the bench.
Sure.
But being a prosecutor, obviously helps me understand what the state
Sure.
needs to do. It also understands what the defense needs to do in order to put on a good case. But as a judge, I don't interfere in the case.
Right.
I just make sure that they are, that the defendant and the state are getting a fair trial, that they are following the rules of evidence, they're following the rules of the procedure, and they're getting a fair trial. Now, in most criminal cases, the jury decides the facts of the case.
Right.
The court makes sure that they follow the law, but the jury decides the facts of the case. So I think the experience was helpful to me, clearly, because I understand and know my way around the courtroom. But, I think because it was so helpful, it also made me a better judge because I don't interject myself into the trial, because that's not fair to the lawyers or the
Right.
litigants or the parties, because it could be a lawyer's strategy to proceed a certain way. And by me interjecting myself in the case, that wouldn't be fair.
That's true. And last year, you celebrated 25 years on the bench.
Yes.
Are there any cases, I know you spoke about as a prosecutor, the young man who was innocent. Are there any cases as a judge that you can't shake or, will always resonate with you?
There are many cases that I've had over the years that you think about.
Sure.
Not just criminal cases, civil cases, family cases, the children. That is the hardest decision, I believe, as a judge. Family cases.
Right.
Because you are deciding, you wonder and you struggle, are you making the right decision for this child? Because you don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
That child has done nothing wrong. They're just torn in the middle of a battle between parents. So many domestic cases, I often think about, and you pray you made the right decision. In terms of criminal cases, there was a case maybe 5 years ago, that had a different impact on me, because I thought I'd seen most things, but the Court of Appeals came down with a decision in 2012 in Maryland versus Unger.
Okay.
And in that decision, it said that the courts over the years had given the wrong jury instructions in all of these very serious cases.
Really?
So hundreds of people that are on life sentence now were going to be released or put on parole, because say they've been in jail for 40 years. So in most cases, they just took a plea and were released.
Right.
Or they went out on parole. But some of the cases, very few of them, had to be retried. And one of those cases landed on my desk.
Okay.
Now, initially, you would think the person's been in jail for 40 years, and we thought the state was going to either, work out a plea deal or release the person. But when the state's attorneys looked at this particular case, they decided to go forward with the trial.
Okay. Wow.
Now, all the witnesses were still alive, so they went forward with the trial. But what it showed me is that even though this murder happened in the early 70s, that courtroom transformed back to the 70s.
Really?
The same raw emotion and hurt and love that existed the day that defendant pulled out that sawed-off double-barrel shotgun and shot his wife in the chest point blank existed in that courtroom that day.
Wow.
So love doesn't die. And even though 40 years had gone by, the hurt and passion that family felt was just as real that day in that courtroom a few years ago as it was 40 years ago. And it also showed me that even though that defendant took the stand again in my courtroom, it was as if he too was in the 1970s. And he did not care that he had killed her, nor did he have any remorse for it. So some people, even though they've served 40 years in jail, could probably serve 40 more.
That's incredible. Just thinking about things like that and how heavy courtrooms can be, are there any things that are funny that happen in the courtroom?
Yeah. But you try not to laugh because that's not your role.
Sure.
But I remember one time, this young man, he was there for, I can't remember, it was a violation of what he was there for. He said, but Judge, I'm a comedian. I do stand-up. I'm thinking, okay, well, let me hear a joke.
Yeah.
Oh, it was not funny. But because he was trying so hard, it was funny. And now and then, people say things that are funny, but, I try not to laugh in the courtroom like that.
It's pretty professional, trying to keep things even.
But there are times when we have happy times in court. And that's when we do adoptions. There's rarely is a time when everybody in the courtroom is happy. And that's when you do an adoption. When you do an adoption, that's the one time where, there's a lot of love, everyone's happy, the family's happy, we get to take a picture and everyone's smiling. So when I have an opportunity to preside over an adoption, I'm happy.
Yeah. For those that don't know, we got about 10 minutes here. Want to cover a couple more things.
Okay.
For those who don't know, what does or what is an administrative judge responsible for?
Okay. The administrative judge is the judge that sets the policy for the court, the cases, the procedure. I assign cases to all the judges, make sure that the administration of the court is run properly. I decide when we close for snow days, we just like we did yesterday. Coordinate with all our justice partners to make sure that there's open communication between the court, the public defender, the state's attorney, the police department, the sheriff's department. All that coordination is done by the administrative judge.
And you've gone through this entire experience from 1993, the year I was born, all the way up until now, moving through the system, getting appointed and breaking the glass ceiling every time. What has that experience been like as a black woman to be the first and I guess the only person that could speak to having that experience?
Well, when I became the first African American woman appointed to the district court, I realized that it was a big deal. It was a big deal, and so many people were looking to me to do a good job. And it was important to me. But I've always tried to do a good job at whatever I did. But I didn't want to make it about being an African American woman. I wanted to make it about being qualified. For that appointment, and it was time to do the right thing. When I got on the circuit court, now I wasn't the first African American woman on the circuit court, I was the second.
Okay.
Judge Houghton was the first the circuit court. I am the first woman, African American or otherwise, to be the administrative judge of this court, and the first African American woman, or first woman to be administrative judge of the Seventh Circuit. And the Seventh Circuit consists not just of Prince George's County, but it consists of Charles, Calvert, and St. Mary's County. So it's my responsibility to make sure that our justice system is functioning in all four of those counties.
Wonderful. And how has that experience been? I know it's been almost 10 years now. Yeah,
it's been amazing. Amazing in the sense that I get an opportunity to create, to plan, to make sure that we're providing a service to the community. For example, our vision for this court is that the Circuit Court for Prince George's County is a fair forum for justice for the citizens of this county. And I mean that.
Absolutely.
But I want to make sure that when people come to our courthouse, that they are treated fairly. And fair means, it doesn't mean that when you come to the courtroom, you always will win your case. But you will be heard, you'll be listened to, you'll have an opportunity to make sure that you've had your day in court. So that's what's so important to me, to make sure that we have a fair justice system.
Wonderful. And what do you think are some things that people don't quite understand about the court system that you wish that they could or do?
That's a good question. First of all, to understand what the courts do. We have a 4-tier court system in Maryland. We have the district court, the circuit court, the court of special appeals, and the court of appeals. And since in Upper Marlboro, the district court and circuit court are located in the same building, so often people are confused when they come into that building. Yes, but the circuit court is the court of higher jurisdiction, of general jurisdiction, meaning that the cases that come from the district court are appealed to our court. In the circuit court, that is where we handle all of the felonies, where we handle the complex civil litigation, the family cases, equity matters, foreclosures. Those things are handled in the circuit court. So I want to make sure that people understand that it is important when you come to court that you come prepared. It's important that if you can afford it, you get a lawyer, and if you can't, there are services there to help you get legal representation, because it is so hard to undo something once it's done.
Absolutely.
That preparation, asking the questions, come to our courthouse. We have services. You can come and get to lawyer referral. You could come to the legal justice clinic. You could come to the paralegal unit. Ways of getting help with your cases if you can't afford a lawyer.
Right.
If you have the means, then You can go to the Bar Association and get a referral for a lawyer that can represent you. But please don't come to court and think if you can just drop all the papers on the courtroom desk.
Is there a commonality that you find, or?
There are more and more self-represented litigants, yes,
Really?
in our courthouse. And I want to make sure that people know that there are resources in the community to help them get the legal advice that they need to represent them.
Absolutely. And speaking of those resources, there are a lot of lawyers, a lot of folks in law school who are trying to figure it out, or maybe in positions where you were some years ago, whether it's the prosecutor's office or in Baltimore, or trying to figure out what those next steps are. Is it getting that master's in was it tax, or is it moving into another arena? What advice would you offer young lawyers, or young folks considering maybe being a judge, or moving in a different direction?
Well, first of all, I would tell young lawyers to first follow their passion, not the dollar.
Right.
Because when you follow your passion, you're going to enjoy what you're doing. There hasn't been a day in my career that I didn't get up and love what I do.
Right.
Okay, so follow your passion, and then work hard. Work hard at what you do in your job, but also work hard in the community. So that means volunteer, and you don't have to ask to be paid for everything you do. Give something back, because if you're a young lawyer now, you have a gift, and you also have the gift of time to go out there and volunteer in our community. And you will find that, as I've found throughout my career, every time I go out and think I'm helping somebody else, it comes back to me triple fold. The relationships you make, the contacts you make, and you don't even know you're making those contacts while you're out there volunteering. Right. So give back to the community.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining us here today. This has been a very enlightening conversation, not only for me, but I hope for you all too. Dr. Sheila, the Honorable Sheila Tillerson Adams, of the 7th District Judicial Administrative Judge.
Administrative Judge of the 7th Judicial Circuit.
Excuse me. Well, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you
so much. Join us next with Dr. Donna Walton, the author of the book Broken Dreams, Shattered Pieces, right after this PSA.
Hey guys, I'm Asia Morgan, an intern at WBGR Network and a proud senior of Morgan State University. Here's a few pointers on campus and community safety. Use your eyes and stay alert. Studies show that looking a predator directly in their face causes them to be less likely to choose you as their victim, because you then have the means to easily identify them. Focus on your surroundings and not your phone. And never walk alone. Walk in pairs or in groups wherever you go, because we are stronger in numbers. If that's not possible, use safety services. Universities have escort services available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Take advantage when leaving late night study sessions, parties, or anything else where you will be usually traveling alone. And when using riding services like Lyft or Uber, always check to see that you're getting into the right car. If you're traveling alone, be a backseat rider, buckle up no matter what, and never forget to share the details of your trip with a friend or family member. Lastly, trust your instincts. If you feel like something is wrong, 9 times out of 10, it usually is. Don't ignore that feeling. This has been a message from the WBGR PSA Project.
Dr. Donna Walton is a speaker, author, and disabilities advocate. She spent the last few decades rebuilding her world after her battle with a very unique and dangerous bone cancer. Help me out here. I'm sorry. Was it bone
osteogenesarcoma.
I was trying to say it,
but it's okay. It's okay. Absolutely.
Well, it's very dangerous and it's very unique. It's a bone cancer that caused her to amputate her left leg from the knee up. This is her autobiography, Shattered Dreams, Broken Pieces. We're going to talk about this today and her ability to battle the different adversities that came her way and how she met them head on and conquered. Thank you for joining the show
Thank you
today.
very much for having me.
I apologize for the slip
Absolutely.
up there.
Hey, it's okay. Those are hard words.
Those are hard words.
Those are hard words.
But I'm very interested about your story. We usually
Sure.
start here with people's background. So we could share a bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I'm a native Washingtonian.
Really? Okay.
Born and raised in D.C., educated in D.C. public schools. Was always endowed with the spirit of knowing that I was going to be great.
Right.
Had a life-transforming experience at age 18. In 1976, I had to have my left leg amputated above the knee for that word, osteogenic sarcoma. But I took that experience and used it as a trajectory to not go to Hollywood, but use my world as my stage and sort of transform my life into acting, advocating, being an advocate, writing, speaking, on behalf of persons with disabilities, and with persons with disabilities and persons who may think they're disabled.
Right. So what's the difference there? There's folks who are disabled, folks who think they are disabled.
Well, you know, disability can be a state of mind.
Sure.
Okay, from my experience, you know, of course, mine is a physical disability. But you know, if persons think they're disabled, they're sort of encumbered by procrastination. You know, they're encumbered by, you know, not sort of living the best life that they can live. You know, living from negative experiences as opposed to a more positive experience. That's that's the disability. You know, when you're not living your best life, and you're encumbered by things that really have no purpose, then you're disabled.
Yes, and that is far from what you've demonstrated.
Absolutely.
As you've written a book, that lack of procrastination there, living your best life, going out, and you starting foundations and sharing your experience with others. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, that's a great question because the book really had to be written. I experienced cancer at a time when it was, you know, people were not talking about cancer. And at 18, I had to sort of endure this whole kind of experience.
What was that like?
You know, it was very difficult. I mean, that's a very sort of trite word to use, but it was very difficult. But the reason why I had to write the book is because I experienced cancer and sort of coming to life, if you will, when there was not any resources for Black women in particular.
Right.
And there was no role model, right? And I was able to sort of survive this whole lived experience of disability, if you will, or being an amputee, without any examples.
Right.
And I became very good at it. And you know, and then I saw my dreams being manifested, not by what I thought I was going to be doing, which was going to be acting. You could not tell me I was not going to be in Hollywood, right? But what happened was that all of my sort of, every time I got motivation or I guess confirmation that I was going to be living, then I started to do just that.
Right.
So I would write stories. I would lead individuals, and it seems like they were always interested in how did you do that. And it wasn't a matter of how did I do that. It was a matter of that's who I was.
Right.
It was an intrinsic, you know, it was just in me to know that I was going to live, and I was going to show others how they could live their best life. And that term is being used now, but I was living the best I could at the time. And so the book really kind of incorporates three sort of tenets, right? It talks about faith. You know, it talks about that's what was my anchor, you know, having, being steeped in faith, right? For some, it could be Buddha. For me, it is God, you know. And I basically believed that each day that I was surviving, that I could do something different. And through that, I accomplished my bachelor's, my master's, and ultimately my doctorate,
Sure.
based on that faith, because it wasn't always difficult. It wasn't always easy, I should say. And then, the book also is anchored in resilience, because there were times when, and the book talks about this, having naysayers, right? Having dream busters, saying what you weren't going to be able to do, and having society, sort of the discrimination, the prejudice, the all the isms, being black, female, disabled, coming at you.
Right.
So I had to go and endure those type of things. And then lastly, the book is anchored in reinvention. Now, I think that that's the real key, because that is the piece that has shown me along my journey that no matter where you start, doesn't mean that that's where you end.
Right.
So I started off, 18 years old, bone cancer rehabilitation, you name it, the negative, no dates, okay? I mean, it was tough.
Sure.
And so, the whole reinvention piece was, you can retool, rebrand, reshape, who you are, and you can become even better than that. You can come, I guess you could say, you'll turn out better sometimes than you were before. And I think I'm a much better person than I was before. And I'm still evolving.
Absolutely.
I'm still evolving because I'm still learning. And I take what I have now and I help other women.
Yes.
So I'm on this journey now. I've created this organization called the Divas with Disabilities Project. Now, it grew out of a Facebook sort of interactive piece where I would just go on and talk to young women.
Sure.
And then found out that this was something that there was a void. There was no...
There's a gap there.
It was a major gap, People weren't talking about it to one another. Our community sometimes is very private, and particularly if you're exposing a piece about yourself that you may not want other persons to know, even though there's a lot of pride in being disabled. I mean, it's disability pride. I mean, and that's why I embrace the word versus turning away from it. I mean, I'm not disabled. That's a different type of word, right? But certainly, I do live with a disability, and with that, there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of activism that comes with that. There's a lot of culture that is within disability.
Sure.
But these women, we've galvanized on this platform, and then we've sort of moved away from that. So now our mission is to raise the image, to raise the awareness, I should say, and change the perception of what disability looks like.
And what are some of those perceptions that you've been living with, or that society has cast on you?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a question that you wouldn't think that is. You think it's kind of the answer is kind of obvious.
Because one of my aunts is disabled, so it's been a part of my life as far back as I can remember. Whether it's helping her to the car or picking up something for her running, and it's just I don't think about it until my sister and we have conversations. Oh, she's disabled, when we don't think of her that way.
Yeah, and she's not disabled actually,
or she has a disability.
She has a disability, right? She's a person with a disability. We like to we like to put the person first in terms of characterizing individuals with different types of abilities, as some people say. So the perceptions is that you are not able to, right? It's so inherent in that what you're not able to. And I'll give you a classic example.
Okay.
So when I was going through therapy, rehabilitation, physical therapy, it was quite comical because I was expected to wear a particular type of shoe. Now, this was back in the 70s, of course, and I'm not trying to down the Hush Puppy, but, the Hush Puppy was supposed to be my shoe. And, it was sort of like your fashion at that point was somewhat
limited.
Yeah, I mean, it was somewhat given to you that this is how you're supposed to look, that you're not supposed, as a woman with a disability, certainly you're not thinking about being fashionable, right? So that was one perception, that you're not supposed to look a certain way, that you're supposed to look disabled. And I'll give you another example. I drive a sports car. I can pull up into a parking space embossed with the handicap, symbol, and people will really come up to me and yell penalties, like how dare you park in that space? Who you think you are? And it's based on the torso, right?
Right.
Because they have no idea that I do walk with a cane, I do walk with a limp, and I am entitled to that parking space. But the perception is that how dare you have a sports car, right? And look relatively attractive, and be parked in that parking space. I mean, there are many examples I could offer you, and I guess the last example I can offer you came from a second grader.
Okay. Recently, or
no? This I guess I should give you that context. So, along my journey, I've taught school. I have, I've done many things, okay? Primarily been in disability policy, training programs. But my first beginnings, my humble beginnings, is where I think the foundation of my learning, understanding, and appreciation for lifelong learning started when I taught second grade.
Okay.
And so this particular second grader, who I will not call his name out, he said to me, he walked to my desk one day and he said, "Miss Walton," he said, "no man will ever marry you." And, startled.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, why would you say something like that?" And he said, "Why would a man marry a woman with one leg?" So, you see, at very young, it shows you how the prejudice and the stereotypes and the stigma has been imposed on a second grader to think that, wow, because my teacher has one leg, it's no way, she's doomed. No man's gonna be bothered with that, right? And so that showed me on my early parts of my journey that it was gonna be tough.
Right.
It was gonna be tough because, the perceptions of how a person with a disability is supposed to live.
And what was the dating scene like for you? You mentioned
Tough, very tough. And I tell you why. And it wasn't tough because dating is hard anyway. I don't know your story, but dating's hard. But when first of all, I went from a vibrant, very confident woman, young girl, to knowing that my stuff didn't stink, so to speak, right? To what's, I guess, being confronted by men who say things like, what's wrong with you? Well, you're too pretty to look like that, or, walk with a cane, or walk with the limp, and I've never dealt with something like this before. And I mean, all these things are somewhat okay, because I mean, not everybody's walking into meeting an amputee on a daily, but it becomes difficult because of lookisms.
Right.
We as a society are really judged on how we look, how we show up, right? I mean, you could show up the way you look, but I mean, you might even be judged because, he's wearing sneakers, or he's wearing, but when a woman is judged by a man, it's typically based on her physical appearance. And though I was very confident in my physical appearance, but it's not something that men are just comfortable with at the start. So you have to get to know her stage. And during that period of my journey, and still today, it's not always that simple.
Right. And
it's a lot of you have to somewhat either show up unapologetically as I'm an amputee, this is what it is, this is not going to change, or you hide behind a screen, which is online dating.
Right.
And that becomes a challenge as well.
Right. And I'm assuming here, in those kind of relationships, or in even more platonic or personal relationships, folks, you become more comfortable with your situation before folks are. Right.
Absolutely.
So can you speak to that experience and being, like you mentioned, confident within yourself?
Well, that's a very good point. How do you well, first of all, it's not my responsibility to make you comfortable.
Right.
However, it does show that when people with disabilities, such as myself, show up unapologetically in their space, confidently, then it does put you at ease and let you see that, oh, okay, I don't have to walk on eggshells, so to speak. You know, I can be myself. I tend to show up in a way that allows individuals to ask me questions. I'm sometimes offended if the first thing you ask me is what happened to you. That's really not cool, and I can tell it's not going to be a good day. Right. If that's the first thing you have to say to me. But the way, I would say the best way, or that I put individuals at ease, is that, I just show up and be honest with, if I want to share with you what happened to me, I will tell you. But otherwise, I interact just like you and me. I mean, that's the thing. There's no difference.
There's no difference, right?
There's no difference. I mean, and I think that's what society is looking for. Well, how am I supposed to treat, with respect, same way you treat anyone else, right? With respect, with dignity, with, Yeah, it's not a hard thing to do, but trust me, we're in this phase of life where it is very hard being included. Persons with disabilities, particularly Black women with disabilities, their voices are muted. They just really are not being heard.
How has your race played, or your ethnicity played, a factor in your experience?
Well, that's interesting as well, because we I sort of live on this triple jeopardy sort of scale, whereby my race, my gender, and my disability are interacting all the time. And there's an intersection of where these identities are sometimes and oftentimes discriminated on, right? I mean, and the interesting thing is I never know sometimes which of those is in operation. Classic example, had an interview with a television station, and I will never call names. Showed up for the interview. I was ready. I was prepared. This was during my early journey as well. When I was, like I said, I was bound for Hollywood, so I was doing everything I could do to get there. So I showed up for this interview, and the interviewer, everything was going well, and then he asked me the question, well, if you had to run for the story, how would you get the story? Well, see, at that point, I knew what was operating right then, right? It was the disability, right? Yeah. So that was just obvious. But there are other times when you know that you're the best qualified person for a particular job, and you leave out, and you just don't know which of those variables, because
are playing out. Wow. And throughout your experience, you've done a lot of incredible things. One of which was earning your doctorate.
Yes.
Can you tell me or share with us that experience of getting through school? I understand that you had the operation in your freshman year.
Yeah, actually, that was my sophomore year. That was an interesting experience because cancer was actually.
And you still graduated on time.
And so the way I say the universe had it, or the way that God planned it. Let's not play with the terms here. The way that God planned it is that I graduated early from H.D. Woodson, and I was supposed to graduate in 75. I came out in 74.
Okay.
So I went to, undergraduate school. I went to Point Park College, as a matter of fact, if anybody's out there, Point Park College, performing arts school.
Okay.
Because, again, knew I was going to be that performer. And came back home to D.C., missing a boyfriend. That's in the book, missing a boyfriend. But anyway, it was all in the plan, because then I came home and I transferred to American University, where I pursued my degree until I was in 1976. So that semester, it was my sophomore semester. And that was a very difficult.
I can imagine.
Returning to school.
Returning to college.
Yes.
Yeah.
Returning to college, absolutely. Living on campus. Now on crutches and getting used to a prosthetic, it was extremely challenging. I do not want to go back there. But that was all about the journey.
Right.
But the doctorate experience was a totally different experience, because now I kind of know myself now, right? But there are access barriers. there's accessibility issues now.
Right.
So I have who I know who I am, right, to get through this program, this rigorous program. But then there are these other barriers that were sort of I was encumbered by. For example, most individuals will, and this snowy weather we've been having,
Yep.
no big deal for individuals sometimes. You know, the streets clear, you're good, right? Well, for me in college, that was major. That was a major shutdown because I drove to school, and then you would have to park.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the curbs and snow. And so it was a lot of barriers.
Right.
At American University, this was a time, this was pre-ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, you know, very little was accessible.
Right.
So I was climbing stairs all the time. So, you know, but what got me through it was that it was another thing. It was another, I guess, indication that I was going to be great. So I had to do it. And God had given me the opportunity to live because, you know, the pieces that are in the book that I'm sure we don't have enough time to explore here is that my cancer, I did not complete all the treatments for my cancer. So I walked out on chemotherapy. Now,
Right.
I don't say that proudly and boldly or brashly to encourage anyone to do that. But that was my time. That was my time. That was my journey. And that was my message that I used to just live my life. If it was
Right.
my destiny, then I was going to be out of that hospital, no chemo. So each year gave me courage. So I knew that if I could survive that, if I made it that far from
Right.
1976 when I was told, if you stop this, you're done. And I'm here.
What did, if you don't mind me asking me, what?
Sure. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. What inspired you to stop the chemotherapy there?
Well, see, again, it wasn't even about inspired. It was about being. It was. How can you describe this? It was ordained. You know,
Okay.
it was just ordained. It was something that everyone has their own personal experience, their own faith.
Right.
For me, it was what I had my talk with God, and it was just that. It was that if this is my destiny, then I would prefer to live it outside of this hospital. Because again, all the statistics were saying,
No.
you're going, this is it, right? So I'm like, well, I wasn't ready to accept that, so I decided to not take any more chemotherapy. And I mean, I took 6 treatments out of 18, and decided that was just going to be it.
Yeah.
So each success that I had in my life along my journey, whether it was getting the bachelor's degree, my master's degree, and you know, ultimately my doctorate degree, were just all indications that my life was going to be. It's all right.
It's all right.
It's going to be all right.
And you touched on this, but you know, I do want to ask directly. What is the difference between saying someone is disabled and saying someone has a disability?
Well, actually, it's just basically you put the person first. You just personalize it. You're not just saying that person is disabled because the
Right.
person is not disabled. It's a person.
It's a person.
With a disability. So it's just a matter of being politically correct.
Absolutely. And I do want to circle back to Divas with Disabilities.
Yes.
Can you touch more on what you guys are doing now?
Absolutely. Well, right now we just became our 501c3.
Wow,
So we're just
congratulations.
extremely awesome. That is just amazing.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And so what we're doing, and we have a couple initiatives that
Okay.
we're working on. One is the Diva State of Mind initiative,
Okay.
whereby it sort of is a double entendre. Mind being, you know, the psychological state, you know, state being where the person lives, the state of mind, the psychological state of mind. And what we're doing is we have divas all over the country. We have 2 in Ghana, 1 in Kenya that we're really excited about,
Really?
and 1 in Uganda that we're trying to still work.
That's awesome.
Trying to work out
Yeah.
to try to be these diva ambassadors. And what they will do is they will have these sort of coalitions and be, you know, give empowerment, education, you know, resource, be a support system to those black women in other countries. And then in America, in the U.S., of course, what we do is we have the same type of global diva ambassadors in different states that have meetup groups and do the same thing, which will culminate into the national conference once we have that. The other major initiative that we're doing right now is for Hollywood. We want to basically show that people with disabilities, Black women with disabilities, we're very, very much underrepresented, right? So we want to be in Hollywood. We want to have roles. So the Divas with Disabilities Project is creating a pipeline of qualified actors, if you will, Black women who can fill these spots. I mean, you've probably heard a lot in the news and probably seen that there are a lot of characters who play, disabled
roles,
but they're not disabled. So that's a big issue when we know that I could play the
qualified folks.
Yeah. So that's one of the projects that Divas is working on right now.
And I do want to ask you about that experience, or I guess that reality, that when you had the amputation, you had these dreams of becoming an actress. When that world kind of shifted, you mentioned that you still have the opportunity to live out your dreams. It was all about perspective.
It really was. What I tried to do, Quentin, was I tried to I think what I did is that I transformed, right, the idea of being in Hollywood and use the classroom, the world as my stage. And then I'm able to act out any role I want. So, I do that through, like I said, through my writings, through speaking. I do a lot of motivational speaking, and I really just like to think of it as a lot of speaking. If I happen to be motivating, that's fantastic. But that's really, my goal is to just really give a message, right? To tell my story and to talk about how important it is to know your truth. And it's really important. I have 25 principles in the book for reinvention, right? And though I can't name them all on today, I can clearly tell you that number one is to live your life with a purpose.
Absolutely.
Have a purpose. And then there's another one that, that talks about the naysayers. It's another one that says, sing your song. There's another one that says, be authentic, live by your own value system, not by someone that say a prayer, right? There are many. There are 25 of them.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, it's not a cookbook. It's not a self-help book, if you will, but it certainly gives you, hey, like I said, I experienced what I did in a time when there were no role models. There wasn't a lot of information, on how to live. My best example, if you will, when I was in the hospital, the doctors were talking to me about Edward Kennedy Jr. I'm like, what does that have to do with Donna Walton?
Yeah.
Well, because he skied, right? Like, oh, okay. So, well, I wanted to dance, right? Wasn't interested in skiing, but so there were no examples. So my book, gives those examples, gives ways of like, okay, well, this is what it looked like for me, and not to say that you have to do this, but certainly you could probably borrow from it, and it may help you. The title of the book, Shattered Dreams, Broken Pieces, really comes from the notion that, I had a shattered dream. It was my idea, like I said, was to be in Hollywood, to be in somebody's movie, right? And then the pieces. The broken pieces are just all of those little disparate things that happen in my life, right? Boyfriends leaving, you just name it. Starting in school, life goes on because you live with a disability. It doesn't change. Your lived experience is, it's the same.
Right.
You just have to do it a little differently.
Absolutely.
Maybe a little slower too.
Absolutely. And we're kind of running out of time here, so I would love for you to share the quote that you share about making opportunities for yourself with the audience.
Well, there's two quotes that I really like.
Okay.
So I'll share this one with you. If what you want is not behind door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3, don't settle for less. Knock a hole in the wall and make a new door. And the other one,
I like that a lot.
Yeah. And the other quote I use, I think is very valuable for when you're getting these messages from yourself. And that is, your thoughts can be either a fierce army marching to destroy you or compassionate paramedics coming to your rescue. So think about that when you're thinking about sabotaging yourself, because sometimes we're our best saboteurs,
Absolutely.
right?
Every time.
We're talking about putting someone down. We can sometimes put ourselves down, and always remember to affirm yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And where can they pick up the book?
Well, you can pick up the book at, of course, you can, I guess, access the book from Amazon.com, and you can also, I think it's Books A Million. You can also get it from my website at DonnaWalton.com.
DonnaWalton.com. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Shattered Dreams, Broken Pieces. You can pick it up on Amazon. You can join us next week and join us with our conversation with Oscar winner Russell Williams. He'll be on the show giving us his experience in creating these beautiful soundscapes that we know and love. As I always tell you every week, if no one has told you that they love you today, remember that I do and always will. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.